I tried.
That's okay. Thank you. Well, I don't remember. Am I on? I can't hear myself back here. There I am. Hi. Now you can hear me. You're awake now, huh? I don't remember who's on the schedule next week for the children's sermon, but I'm going to write Tiger Lily in. Yeah. She's got it. We'll just pass along some notes to her. There's a book that we can use. She'll be right. If it's me, I know who I'm handing it off to. Hey, while we're thinking about kids, let me throw this out there since, I'm here and have a microphone. Tomorrow, we leave for student camp, youth camp, and so please be in prayer for that, for travel there on tomorrow morning and travel back on Friday and all the stuff in between during the week. How God's going to move in this week. No injuries, please. The reason we got a golf cart to drive around this year is because we remembered all the injuries from last year. So let's pray over those things. Thank you, Destiny. And Reggie. So we thank them for that memory. So please be in prayer this week for them. We have 44 students going and 5 leaders. And so please be in prayer for every single one of them by name. No, I can give you a list if you want it, but please pray for everyone and the leaders going. Of course, I'll be there. Crystal, you saw her just a moment ago. Pray for her, and Kristen, and Mike Moreno, and Hannah in the back there. Those are my 5 of us going to walk alongside the students this year. So please be in prayer for us. And then the next week, the preteens go to their camp, and so you can begin praying for them now as well. So, lots of good stuff coming up with that. So last week we started kind of a mini-series within our series that we've been looking through a lot of end times and some of those messages. And so we paused for a moment as we go through last week, and you'll hear it again this week, and then it'll be finished next week through Matthew chapter 25. And so we heard about the parable of the 10 virgins. And we looked through that and what that's meaning in its context. And so in this passage, we continue our look into Christ's return. And we continue in that same theme today, looking at Christ's return. And so last week, we see it through the readiness manifested in preparation and waiting. And so there's a lot of waiting in that message, but we need to be prepared. And so that's a little bit of a calmer view of it. Just be prepared and you wait on the bridegroom. And so we're waiting for Christ's return. But in this week, we take a shift in it. And so there's still a need for us to be ready and prepared, but it doesn't stop there. And so this week in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30, we look at the parable of the talents. And so in this parable of the talents, it's readiness manifested in working and serving. So last week in being prepared and waiting, this week in serving and working. So Jesus calls on us regularly to make the most of our spiritual opportunities. In other words, our saving faith becomes our serving faith. If we are saved, we need to be serving. Those go together. And so keep in mind, this is a blending of these parables to mix them together. And so we have the waiting and the preparation, but waiting and preparation does not mean that we get the authority to sit on a couch and just watch the world burn and wait for the Lord. Now, we are waiting on Him, and we are prepared. And in that preparation, it means simply this, that we know the Master. And we're waiting on Him because we know who He is and we know His promise. But that doesn't give us the authority to just sit back and wait and do nothing. There's a call for us to work, to serve, to be active in our faith. These have to go together. John MacArthur notes this way. He says, perhaps because it was because of that thought that perhaps the people in this time thought that the Lord was coming momentarily, not knowing the timing, that they thought He was coming momentarily. So some of the believers at Thessalonica fell into undisciplined, careless living and decided to not work at all. And so consequently, they became busybodies who did nothing productive and even disrupted the church. And so there's some not working, and there's some working on the wrong stuff and with the wrong focus, and they become a busybody that disrupts the flow of the church. And so they allowed a misunderstanding of the work of the Lord and the waiting on the Lord to manifest itself in that no work, or other times the wrong work. And so it's not uncommon to gain these things in the church today as well, that Suddenly you have somebody that has to have an opinion on every single movement of the church, and their opinion has to be heard. It's not good. It's not right. I've dealt with this. I don't like dealing with this, but it'll happen again. Right? I've dealt with this in another church where there's a concept of I need to be heard, but being heard is being heard, not I have to do what you say, because there's 18 different opinions that come through an office, right? And so we get some of this that interacts within the church then and in the church now. We can see overstepping boundaries or overstepping leadership. I know more than the leaders that God has placed in the placement of this church or whatever church it may be. Well, that's not right either. You're trying to overstep God's authority in that. Or you can see it manifest itself in the acting as a holy gossip. Oh, bless their heart. Let's pray for them. They're struggling here and here and here and here, and I'm better than them here and here and here, and we should pray for them. That sounds sweet, but that's just gossip. If you're talking about leadership, you're talking about other people in any form that's not your authority to talk about it, then you're a gossip and God's calling you out, myself included. And so these aren't healthy things, and this is stuff that starts to show up in the church. And let me tell you, none of that stuff is holy work. That's not what this is about. That's not what God calls us to. It's not healthy for us to sit back and do nothing. This is ungodly. It's not healthy for us to overwork and step into the wrong work. We'll hear more about that in a little bit. Or even self-serving work. That's not holy work. That's not God's work. This is ungodly. And so Paul rebukes them severely and commands them to work in quiet fashion and eat their own bread. I hear that phrase as the way that Joel has said this for a couple years now. Work in quiet fashion, stay in your lane. You've heard him say that statement a lot. I agree with it. He says, work in quiet fashion, eat your own bread. He then admonished the whole church not to grow weary of doing good. Keep doing what we're doing. He clarifies this, or says this throughout 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. To return to the root of what we're trying to talk about in this message, don't let any circumstances cloud your understanding. Here's the simple promise we're going to repeat from last week, this week, and next week. He is coming. Stay faithful. And so there was a category of those who had another misunderstanding. We already made a reference to it this morning. Another category of people had another misunderstanding. They believed that he wouldn't be coming soon, and so they could live a life of mockery, self-indulgence, laziness, no moral restraint whatsoever. He's not going to come back for a long time, so I can live the way I want to live now, and I'll deal with that life later. It sounds like the days of Noah. That's what the world had become. I can do what I want, and I'll deal with it later. Except we don't know God's timing, and that timing ran out. And so this isn't what God calls us to either. 2 Peter 3:3-4 with some of the same vein of thought comes through, and it says, above all, be aware of this, scoffers will come in the last days, scoffing and following their own evil desires, saying, where is his coming that he promised? Ever since our ancestors fell asleep, all things continue as they have been since the beginning of creation. In that passage he continues, and that's where we hear, he will come like a thief in the night. He is coming with that promise. So these passages as a whole in Matthew 25, it's about the kingdom of heaven, and it includes these texts and those considered real and counterfeit. We talked about this a little bit last week, that there's a broad definition when it talks about church in this. And so it's kind of giving us as a collective whole, but even inside of that, it's saying there's some inside of this grouping that aren't true believers. And so remember, the 10 virgins go out, and they look similar, but remember, some are not prepared. And so in the same way, this week with the parable of talents, they may look the same, but there are some that are not prepared. And some that are not really committed to God. And so we kind of get a general picture, and then it kind of narrows in to the exact of what God wants us to be and what that looks like in salvation with Him. And so he calls it his own slaves, his own church, or at least those alleged to belong to him. And so we kind of have that general picture. Now we read of these talents. It could be better considered for this context, abilities. And so in talents, it's talking about money. In this picture, it probably lands better to say we might think of like abilities. But even then, I think that's kind of a loose picture of what it looks like. Maybe more exactly, it looks more like God gave us an ability, but the talent is the opportunity to use the God-given ability. And so God, as the master, gives an opportunity to use what He's already given you. God gave the ability, God supplies the opportunity. And so we're going to take a look at 4 basic principles throughout this parable, 4 basic principles of our spiritual opportunities. And so first, there's a responsibility that we receive. And so in verse 14, Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse 14 through 15, "For it is just like a man going on a journey. He called his own slaves and turned over his possessions. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each one according to his own ability. And then he went on a journey immediately." And so, as we know the master, it's important to know that the master knows us. He knows us intimately. He knows more detail about you and about me than I know about myself. That's a little wild to think about. But He knows us intimately. And so with that, it says God gave each according to his own ability. Well, God gave the ability, so of course God knows it. And God gives what can be handled. And so, even in this time, a wealthy person would have had special slaves who functioned as overseers of his household and managers of his business. And so that this wording kind of makes sense in the time frame. And so if we put it into language we might put into a context for us, the slave would picture as the church, the servant. The man is Jesus. And the journey is his time away from earth between the first and second advents. And so we have this journey away in Jesus in his physical departure from here, but he's still interacting. We have the church, and we have him. And so Jesus mentions only 3 levels of responsibility, but those are suggestive of the extremely wide range of individual abilities among people. So he says the 5 talent, the 2 talent, the 1 talent. But we all vary greatly in natural talent, right? In our intellect, our other capabilities. We're all different. We don't function the same way. We don't have the same skills, the same abilities. Also vary greatly in opportunity and privilege. Some church members have heard the gospel and studied Scripture since early childhood. You were in the church forever. But others know only rudiments of the faith and have had little opportunity to explore more through your faith just yet. Those who are true believers are also given spiritual gifts that are widely ranging from person to person. It's different. You can see that in Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12. Some Christians are privileged to live and work closely with others of like faith. Yes, I go out and do other things, but on the day-to-day in my office, I'm working with other believers. Your job may not be like that. Other Christians, however, are the only believers in their families, or even their own community, or town, or neighborhood. God knows intimately your abilities, your gifts, your opportunities, your circumstances of every person. He knows every detail of that. And so His calling to you and His request of you or command of you as servant may look different than mine. And He graciously assigns responsibility according to who we are, and our circumstances, and our location, and all of those elements. Even among the 12, we see different capabilities, different relationships, different opportunities, different allotments of trusted responsibility. It looks different, doesn't it? And so the message of responsibility is very simple for us. Accomplish as much as possible for the sake of the master while the master is absent. What can I accomplish for the master? Well, notice in this that the return is not equal of the effort, it's equal of the return, but the equal in effort. And so we see of their work in a moment as we dig a little bit deeper, the numbers look different. The results look different. But the calling is that we put in the same effort of what God has called us to do. We are all different Christians with different stages of life, different backgrounds, different skills, results, opportunities, platforms. Just because of that piece alone, that should reduce the painful comparison trap. I can't do your work because I'm not you. And so I have no reason to compare myself to your work because God called you to that work. And He called me to my work, but we work together for one purpose. That comparison trap is dangerous. It's not godly. The busybody, that's not godly. The one sticking nose other places, that's not godly. The lazy, that's not godly. And so in 1 Corinthians 3:8 says, now the one planting and the one watering are in one purpose, and each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. We are different, but we work for the same purpose. But your work is your work, and my work is my work. And together we accomplish something a lot bigger. So we don't need to overstep. We don't need to compare. We just work together as one body. Some plant, some water, but one purpose. And so this is our responsibility, to embrace the opportunities given to us by God, given to us by the Master. And so then we also have a reaction. We've had a responsibility, we have a reaction. In verse 16 through 18, the man who had received 5 talents went, put them to work, and earned 5 more. In the same way, the man with 2 earned 2 more. But the man who had received 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. So the 5 talents, he's eager to serve the master, an immediate reaction. There's no hesitation. In that passage, there's no hint of a hesitation in him. The master says, I'm leaving, this is what I'm giving you, and he gets to work. No delay, just for children, adults too, since Dee just called us out as well. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. Okay. I don't like that one. I use it a lot, I teach it a lot, but I don't like it. The 5 talents, he gets to work immediately. The 2 talents, the same. It gives us the same. While less was given, and because of that, less is made in the end, he still doubles what was given to him. And so the percentage of that profit is the same, and he does it as well, without delay. Understand that when it says it put his money to work, that doesn't imply that he gave it to some lending agency and just handed it over and said, let it just rest and do its job over there while I can rest and be lazy with it. No, what it means is he traded and he retraded. He figured out work and he put the money to work. He went out and started a business and found a way to sustain that money to continue to grow because he doesn't know when the master is going to return. And so the master just happens to return at a point that money doubled. But it could have been that it could have sustained even longer. What if the master has gone longer? It could have continued. And it could have continued at a faster rate because he's doing the work. And so we see the same with the first two slaves, that they used to the full advantage all the resources that the master gave them. Gave them the ability, the knowledge, the opportunity. They took the responsibility, and so we see the reaction of it all, that there's a profit coming through with it. Now, placing it in the lending service might look like something like this today, and I apologize if I step on a toe, sort of, but it's one we have to think about. Maybe the modern image of that, with a context of a parable like this, if we're talking about it in serving the Lord, some of that picture comes through to say, let me give it to somebody else to do the hard work, and I'll just receive the profit. That might look a lot like the church life, right? The paid staff can do it. That happens a lot with children. Let me just give my kids to the church. They'll teach them about Jesus. I'm going to be over here doing something else. I'll just see the profit of their better behavior. That's not how it works. God called you as the parent to be the spiritual foundation in your home and for your children. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean don't come to church with them. I still want to see them here on Wednesdays and Sunday mornings. But what it means is it has to continue in the home. I love your kids. I can't be their parent. That's not me. God didn't call me to parent your kids. He called me to parent my kids. And so I have to do the same job. That's true of a lot of other ideas in the church. We get this sometimes. Somebody walks in and says, I got an idea. Great, go do it. Joel and I have gotten a lot better at that response. Good. You'll have fun doing it then. And the truth is, ideas are great, and we need new ideas, but we can't do them all. You can, I can't. And that's a tough thing to say and to understand, but here's the thing. If God has placed a calling on you, that calling is for you. Not for me, for you. And His expectation is that He gave you the ability and the opportunity to accomplish that calling in your life. Don't lend it to somebody else. Get to work. And sure, we come along and we assist in things. That's part of the role of us as the pastors of this church, between me and Joel and the work that Dee does and Kristen and Tanya. And there's a lot of work that we put in to do these things. And we assist, we walk alongside, we help where we can. Shepherding the church, walking with you. But you have to understand that we have the same calling that I'm barking at you right now. You got to do this in your own home. Husbands and wives, you have to disciple each other, take care of your home, lead your children. But what I think can get lost sometimes, and is a healthy reminder, is we have to do the same in our homes. And so one of the most beautiful things, and I talked about it this morning already once, that you'll hear, Joel doesn't do much on Saturdays anymore. But that's his time with his grandkids. Joel and Raynell have a time that they get to go and see their grandkids and invest in them because God placed that on them. Same with Dee and Tasha, and Kristen and Justin, and me and Anastasia. Right? We do a lot here, or any of the teachers in the academy, or if you serve anywhere else within the church, that's awesome. We love it, but you still got to maintain the home. And so even then, we as the staff within the church, we have to go home and take care of our own kids and teach them and raise them and make sure they know they are loved by their parents and loved by God. And that also means that we have to demonstrate that as a marriage. My kids are going to see what a healthy marriage looks like because Anastasia and I have to demonstrate that. But that also means we have to see each other. Sometimes. So that's hard because that means we have to be selective, right? That means that the church can post 20 different ministries coming up and you can't physically do them all. And that's okay. This isn't trying to command you to say, go out and serve in every single thing we ever offer. We got 3 events on the same day at the same time. You better be at all of them. I don't know how to do it. It won't work. But the truth of it is, God has placed a calling on you in a specific place with a specific skill set. I remember in Indiana working in youth ministry there was a guy I thought, oh, he's going to do great with youth ministry. I'm going to call on him to help me. And so I said, hey, I've got an event coming up. Will you help me with the kids? Maybe you want to interact more. And he says, I hate kids. We're off to a bad start. Are you sure you don't want to help me? And he says, look, military background, if one of those kids mouths off to me, I will hit them in the mouth. Okay, I'm not going to use you in that ministry of this church because I don't want to deal with the paperwork. But he was well suited for a lot of other areas inside of that church and still serves well in that church, just not in that capacity. You see, there's a place for you to serve really well. And understand, if I believe all the ministries of a church are healthy and they're good. But you can be great in the way that you serve God if you select the right places to serve. And not every single one, because you're just going to be exhausted by the end of it and you're no good for anybody. And you're not doing the work that you've been called to do. The first 2 are quick to act because they know the master. Remember, the master knows them intimately, but they know the master. They know the truth of the master. They have clear instruction from the master. They trust him. And so it's easy to do the work because they know he said, I need this from you. Yes, sir. Get to work. The third servant, though, he doesn't understand the master. He doesn't seek to understand the master. And so he went away to dig a hole and hide the talent. Now understand, in this time, there's not like safety lock boxes. So if you had a valuable something, you might actually dig a hole and bury it. And that was an appropriate way to deal with it. But This is a working resource, and so that's not the right way to deal with it. And so he doesn't understand the command of the master because he doesn't know the master. That might be some of our issues sometimes. Do I really know the master? That was last week. Are we prepared? If we're prepared, then the rest of this starts to fall in line. See, he doesn't know the master, but even then, he could have gone to learn about the master. And understand, you might receive a calling from the Lord in your life that you're going to say, now you want me to do what? I don't know how to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't like doing that. I'm scared of doing that. Are you sure you called the right person, God? You sure you dialed the right number? Because I think you messed up. I've been there. But you know what you do? If God is calling you to something that you're not sure of, understand, number one, if God calls you to something, He's going to supply everything you need for it. And that's also going to come in the right people that can guide you and teach you and walk with you. And He'll get you there. But that also means we got to listen. That means I got to ask sometimes. God, who do I need to talk to learn about this? That we're always learning more and more and more. But see, the third slave, he didn't do that. He just hid it and walked away from it. He refused to work. Maybe it's because he feared failure. I don't know. But he didn't do the work. He may have been given less overall. He only had the one talent. But the obligation was the same. Use what I'm giving you to the maximum ability. Don't settle for good, work for great. And he did nothing. See, we're given talents and abilities and opportunity, and the master will watch, and he's going to check back on the work that he's given us. He's not going to just hand it off and run away. He's going to supply it, but he's also watching. Now, you might argue the salvation of the third servant. I've read a couple different things. Some kind of say it this way, whatever to that. The point is, he wasn't faithful in what was given to him. He refused the reward by not using the talent. And he viewed God wrongfully. He had a wrong image of who God is. He was based in religion in how he was responding. And so we have a reckoning that we face then, the responsibility, our reaction, and the reckoning that we face. So after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 talents approached, presented 5 more talents, and said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. Look, I've earned 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. Then the man with the 2 talents approached, and he said, Master, you gave me 2 talents. Look, I've earned 2 more talents. His master said the same to him. Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. Then the man who had received 1 talent also approached and said, Master, I know you. You're a difficult man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. So I was afraid and went off and hid the talent in the ground. Look, what you have is yours. But his master replied to him, You evil, lazy slave, if you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have deposited my money with the bankers. And when I returned, I would have received my money back with interest. And so the first order of business, what was done with the master's talents? He comes back and settles accounts. Now, we don't know exactly how long he was gone, just that it was a long time and that he would return. Sounds similar, right? Jesus has been gone for some time now. We don't know when he's coming back. This was the same message to the disciples. He's coming back, but it wouldn't be as soon as they thought. And so we receive kind of in this parable that they're listening to, perhaps that was part of the reasoning of it. You don't know when I'm going to come back, and it may not be as soon as you think, so there's work to be done. Continue to serve God in diligence. Jesus will return one day to settle his account with the world. Revelation is a prophecy of that return, and when those who have been faithful will be bestowed with white robes and live eternally with God. What an incredible reward. So the first servant, he gained 5 more. Now, when he says this, notice he doesn't say it in arrogance. He says it in simple, factual confidence. He speaks back what he made, because it's the truth. But it's also because he understands that those abilities, that talent, that opportunity It was given by God anyway. So doing the entrusted work, they're only returning to God what was already his. So there's no arrogance about it. He's just saying, you asked me to do this. This is what came about from it. Here it is, Lord. Here it is, Master. He just gave back to the Master what was already his. He did what he was supposed to do. In the same way, when you have done all that you were commanded, you should say, we are unworthy servants. We've only done our duty, according to Luke 10. What a response that would be. God, I just did what you asked me to do. When the master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave, he was commending the slave's attitude more than just the accomplishment. It was the obedience in it. He commended the man's excellent character because the master represents the Lord himself when he returns in glory and power to establish his kingdom. It's remarkable to contemplate that the holy, just, perfect Lord of the universe will deign to praise his true disciples for their faithfulness. That the God of the universe is going to say, good job. You did your work that I asked you to do. Well done. There's a commendation of the work, the attitude, and the character. It's high praise, and it's a high reward. And it comes back in the form of more responsibility, more opportunity on earth, and heavenly opportunity to continue to serve. And then that final little phrase, enter into the joy of your master. You have served well, you have followed the master, you received divine work, divine sinlessness, divine holiness, and divine joy. You did what I asked, you followed my command. Come into my presence and receive all of this. Second servant, the same response. 2 gained back. Same profit margin, right? He's equally faithful with what is given. He's equally rewarded. He's faithful with little, and so he's given more. But the third servant is where we go back to. Then the man who had received the 1 talent also approached and said, Master, I know you. You're a difficult man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. There's no presentation of his earnings. Instead, he provides an accusatory and self-serving excuse. Well, see, I didn't do my work because you're this. Maybe we've tried that excuse sometime. We like to just shift it so it looks like the other person's to blame, but it was actually me just not doing what I needed to do. Lumped in on the surface as one of the slaves, but clearly he didn't know the master. And so what we see is no production, no profit, no attempt. We see nothing. A slave doesn't represent an atheist or even an agnostic because he recognized the master as his legitimate owner and no doubt made a pretense of honoring the master while he was away. He didn't misuse his talent on immoral and selfish pursuits like the prodigal son or embezzle it like the unmerciful servant of Matthew 18. He simply just disregarded the stewardship he had been given. God said, I want you to be a steward of this. And he just cast it away. And he instead tried to blame the master, calling him unmerciful, dishonest, hard, harsh, difficult. Isn't it interesting, though, that this is the image in the mind of an unbeliever? This is the picture of God to someone who doesn't know the master, justifying self at the expense of God. But look at the contrast. If you remember the other two, his response to them, it's not harsh. It's not difficult. In fact, he was generous and blessed them beyond their abilities, beyond what they could even come up with on their own. They're given more. They're filled with eternal joy in his presence. It's completely different. And so I was afraid and went off and I hid your talent in the ground. Look, you have what is yours. Fear drove this man to hide his talent, to hide that opportunity. Understand, this isn't talking about a reverent fear. It's a fear of contempt. There's no love, there's no respect, just resent and a despising heart. You see this played out in the world around us, right? Turn on anything and you see this spirit. It can be true in the church too, though. Religion can carry this same mentality and cause overworking, trying to appease an unmerciful God. We misunderstand what the master is calling us to. We misunderstand the very character of the master. But the master responds, you evil, lazy slave. If you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, then why didn't you at least do something, right? Like, if you really feared me and thought that of me, then you would have done something. It's kind of ironic in that response, because the slave says, you're difficult and you're harsh and you discipline this way. And to the two obedient, they gain reward. To the one that believed that of the master, that's the very thing he got. I think of you this way, and so that's the punishment he receives. He doesn't confirm the insult by any means, God, in his response. He just gives that kind of, if you really thought that, you might have done something, but you're lazy. That seems like a really painful response. I'm pretty sure I've probably received that response too. You could have done something, but you just watched TV instead. You could have been learning more about the master, but you were just doing this instead. This is maybe the one place that I think you could consider the way he says it. You could have at least given it to a lending agency. Like, wasn't the calling before, but look, if you really feared me, something. Maybe that is the one time I agree to say, look, if you're terrified of raising your children in Christ, that's why we're here. Now, God's going to deal with you. I can't help you with that one. If that's how you want to raise your kids, God's going to deal with you. But at least let your kids know Jesus. At least send them somewhere is going to teach them about Jesus. Wednesdays, Sundays, academy, something, camp. And maybe that's part of the response. At least take a step. But instead, there's total irresponsibility and total indifference. His lack of effort shows his lack of belief in who the master is. And so finally, we see the reward that's gained. And so in verse 28, it says, "So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. And throw his good-for-nothing slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The church is always going to have those committed, faithful stewards. It's always going to have committed stewards that are still growing, as we all are, even the first one. We're still growing. It's going to have those that are just learning what it looks like to step into that commitment and what does service look like. You're going to have new and young that need a lot of help to come along to figure that out. But it's also going to always have the tare among the wheat. The ones that don't actually know the master, like we talked about last week. The talent is taken from this one and given to the faithful servant. God will commend the faithful, but he's going to judge the lazy and wicked. And so we want to be on the side of that service and that work. The parable further defines the general theme of watching while Christ is away. Watching doesn't mean settling down to inactivity, like we talked about. It means a wholehearted commitment to Christ's purpose in this present world. Christ has a purpose here, and he's given us a purpose here. So that means we have work to do. Last week we saw that we need to get our house in order first. Be prepared as you wait. Know the master. This week we see that as we've prepared and while we wait, we serve and we bring others to know the master so that they can be prepared. When we do not use for the Lord, we're in danger of losing. One of my close friends has always said this about the talent that God's given him, that he's great at leading worship. God gave him a beautiful talent. And he has said, I won't use that talent for anything else because God can take it away at any moment. And so his commitment is my talent that God gave me, my ability, my opportunity that God gave me will always be to serve him. What we do not use for the Lord, we're in danger of losing. It's possible that the one talent man thought that this one talent wasn't really very important. He didn't get the 5, he didn't even get the 2. Why worry about 1? Because he was appointed as a steward by the Lord, that's why. God called him to care for the 1. Were it not for the 1 talent people in the world, very little would get accomplished. His 1 talent could have increased it to 2 and brought more glory to his master. I try to teach this often in leadership. We have leaders all around us. When you go to a concert, you see the person on stage, right? You see the person in the spotlight, and that's the one that we think is the leader. Even if you go to a conference and you see the big name pastor walk out and he stands on the stage, there's people in the back that were the lead of the green room, that were feeding people. They're a leader in their job. You see somebody in the back running the lights, there's a leader in that position. There's the ones that help set up, there's a leader in that position. When you have a concert, somebody runs the guitars out, changes the strings when they break, tunes up everything. There's leaders all around this, and some of them are backstage. And sometimes it may be that somebody is given a lot of one-talent opportunities. And so it may not feel like as much, but there's a job to be done. And we need the one talent, we need the two talent, we need the five talent. We need every piece of it to be able to accomplish what God's calling us to accomplish. No matter our position, our education, our platform, use what you have. We're called to serve and bring glory to the Master. We ask for a lot here in what we do, and this is a very giving church. You hear that often. And understand that the reason we even bring some of that up is not because I'm trying to pull you in and say, I just need you to serve. One of the things that we talk about often is if we try to force you to serve, right? And I'm like, come on, we're desperate for help. You don't want to be a part of it because you're like, I'm going to get trapped for the rest of my life. Right? I'm going to have to be the rec leader for VBS for the rest of my life. I will never get out, right, Amy? I can leave? I'm just kidding. That can happen with any ministry. If you'll come and serve and we never give an ending date, it can feel like you're trapped for the rest of life and we sound desperate and you're like, I don't want to do this. But rather what we want to do and what you should be able to see is there's a job to be done. And it's joy in doing that work. Now, you're going to have a whole lot more joy if you do the right work. If you sign up for everything, it's not going to be fun. You're not going to find joy in it. But if you find the places that God is calling you to serve well, oh, it's a blast. I can tell you, and Joel can confirm it for him, and I'm sure Dee can confirm it too, and Kristen's not here today, but I'm sure she'd say the same. We've talked about it. There are days that there are complaints. And it makes you question what we do. But then I get to do what I love and teach or preach, and all that's gone. Because God called me to do this, and I love it. And so when I get to the point of getting to stand where I want to stand, to be able to do that part of it, it's a blessing and it's joyful. And I'm sure the same for Dee. When he gets up here, not as a show, but because it's what God said, I gave you a talent and ability to do this, all the stress has gone away for at least a little while. Because I'm doing what God called me to do, and I love it. And so when you come and you serve in different places in the church and you find God's calling specifically for you in whatever church you're a part of, hopefully this one, you find that right place, it's a blessing. You get to serve with excitement in it, and you get to see lives changed, and that brings a joy that I can't explain. It's exciting. And so yes, I picked on Amy. I love what I get to do out here. Not because somehow the youth pastor is always going to be the rec leader, but because I get to go and play and laugh with kids and tell them about Jesus and get to know them in a fun way. And so, maybe the preparation sometimes is I don't understand how these games work. I don't know what they want me to do. I don't get it. I'm supposed to twist what and jump over how many things? I don't read those things well, but then I get out here and the kids are laughing and we enjoy the company, and there's great joy. And it's worth every moment of it. And so when that begins, it's not work. It's a blessing. And so as you find those places through the youth ministry or the children's ministry or bread ministries or missions or 4th of July or whatever the thing that we have, you find the right place, you're going to find joy in it because you're serving the Lord in the way that He's called you to do. And it's quite simple. God has given us everything. Those who used what were given faithfully give back to the Master what is His. And they are given more than expected in return. The Master returns even more than they could ask or imagine. In other words, another phrase you hear often, you can't outgive God. And so if we'll commit to what God's called us to, He's going to supply the knowledge to do it. He's going to supply the energy to do it. That there are things that sometimes we do that I don't know how we make it through it with enough energy and excitement, but it just turns on and it's there and we have a great time. He supplies it every time. You can't outgive him. Maybe you're wondering why growth isn't happening in the way that you want or in the place that you desire. Truth is, God desires that your growth be in the place where he's called you. Grow and serve in that place that God has given you. Yes, I'm talking about in the church, but I'm also talking about in those specific places in your life as well. Parents, this is discipling each other in marriage and training your children in Christ. Neighbors, are you building community where you are and ultimately sharing your faith in that environment? Are you demonstrating the gospel to your neighbors? Worker, co-worker? Are you witnessing at your place of work? Do you work in honesty and integrity that they see Christ in you? Church member, we already talked about that. Are you serving somewhere? I would love you to help me with youth ministry. I need some help. We're growing and I need some help there. But if that's not your calling, then don't come to me. Find the right place and serve. But don't skip out on serving. The list could go on and on and on the places that you could serve in our specific places, in our specific lives. We are given the abilities to do with our gifts only what we are capable of doing. Instead of worrying about why we are not reaching thousands, we must first put to use our talents with what we've been given. Start in those small places. Until you do the little that God has called you to do. I read this online the other day. I forgot who wrote it, so sorry. Until you do the little that God has called you to do, he won't show you the more you are praying about. Many of us want the end result before we do the little up front. Often we will not take the little step of faith in something God has commanded until we understand the whole picture of what will happen. When in reality, we must take the little step of faith before God will ever show us the big picture of his plan for our lives. We have to obey in the little things before we receive the big things. As Jesus says, he that is faithful in little will be faithful in much. I see many people covet the blessing of those who have been given much, but misunderstand that the reward of those for those who have been given little and those who have been given much is the same. The Master and his joy. Eternal life with God is the reward. And so it's not the measure of how much we have here on earth, but the measure of what we're doing with what we're given. If we faithfully use what we are given and are capable of giving back in love and not fear, we'll earn the words of the Father that you've already heard a couple times. Well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your Master. And so as we close today, we got to go back to the statement from last week. Do you know the Master? Don't walk out of here not knowing the Master. Don't live like the days of Noah where you think, I don't see what's happening, so I can just live the way I want to live. That's not true. We don't know his timing. We don't know our own timing. Do you know the Master? Settle that one today. You have a place where God is calling you and you've been reluctant. God, I don't know. I don't want to serve there. Let me remind you, he's called us to do that, but he'll also supply everything for you. So there doesn't have to be fear in it. There doesn't have to be fear in serving where God has called you. Or do you have a burden for someone who needs to know the Master? Somebody in your life that you know they need Jesus. I'll pray and close this. And as Dee plays, the altar will be open in just a moment. Maybe you need to come today and know him and don't wait any longer. Or maybe you need to come and say, no, I've been ignoring what you've called me to be a steward over. And you need to just deal with that with him. Maybe it is a place to say, I need to pray for my neighbor. I need to pray for somebody that needs to know the Master today. We'll pray over them together. Father, I thank you for this morning. Thank you for your word and God, that you supply everything. You supply the ability, the skills, the talent, the timing, the opportunity. God, you supply it all. Our job is just to be faithful and obey. And even that, we mess up often. And so God, I ask that you would continue to strengthen us to say, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, to know the Master. Yes, Lord, to serve the Master. God, that we could see your name reigning in glory all around us. We get to contribute to that. God, that more would come to know you. We know that time is running thin. We don't want to waste any more moments. God, let this be a place that praises your name, like this morning, hearing the echoes of praises of your name echoing down this street and down across the highway here. God, that this would be a place that we can grow and we can go out and do the work you've called us to and serve you in greatness.